So, hello everyone, and very good morning or good evening to you. This is where you're joining us from. We're going to give people a couple of minutes to join, and we're looking forward to a really engaging discussion today with, some very passionate, driven, talented people that, we've interacted with. So we're really hoping to give you some insights into the application process, the MBA application process. And we hope that you get a lot of insight from this session. To give you some background, this is a discussion or a panel discussion that we host every year. It is one of the most insightful discussions that you will have access to. We're going to talk about a lot of elements of the MBA application process. We're going to ask admits to the world's best business schools, what really works for them. We'll understand their thought process. We'll understand what really went into their applications. And we'll also get some tips from them. So we'll understand what might help you as you're thinking about or even preparing your application to business school. And feel free to drop questions during the discussion. Feel free to drop questions into the question and answer box. And what we will do is we will look at a session where we're answering those questions post our discussion with the panel. What I'm going to do before we start our session is I'm going to just introduce the red pen to you and give you some background, to where we are today and why we're having this discussion today. So what we're going to first talk about is give you insight into the red pen landscape. So we have a decade plus of experience. We cover the gamut of educational consulting. So we work with everyone from 8th graders to, potential PhD applicants. We work with MBA applicants, and we're happy to have admissions to, leading institutions, global institutions the world over. We're affiliated with we're affiliated with bodies of, across different service lines, which hold us to the highest ethical standards. We're very proud of the kind of advice that we give individuals at every stage of their educational journey. This slide is a slide that we're really the most happy about because every single school that you see on the slide has been a process of discovery. It's been a process of evolution, and we're very, very happy to have those discussions with applicants in terms of school fit, in terms of, what is it that they really want to gain from an MBA degree. And, a lot of the schools that you see over here have been a result of intensive discussion, a lot of soul searching and reflection, and really thinking about what business school best fits the needs of people who are applying to them. So while, yes, these are leading business schools, we're also very proud that these are best fit business schools for the people that we have worked with. Where before we, start the discussion with the panel, I want to just spend some time setting the context in terms of what you need to think about as you're really listening to, different pieces of advice, right? One of the things that we always talk about is understanding how business schools or admissions officers really evaluate your profile. And, it's primarily in the form of this pyramid where, this will give you a sense of the elements that you need to focus on and that you really need to soul search and represent to an admissions officer. The first thing or the strongest piece of advice that we're going to give you is to look at your academic potential. Understand your standardized test, understand what works for you, look at your undergrad GPA, look at evaluating schools as per, how your GMAT, GRE, and your undergraduate GPA, how they stand. So this is like the strongest base of your application. This is something that, you absolutely need to focus on and have in place by the time you apply. This next is your work experience. We always advise applicants that they need to have a body of work experience so that they are able to really position their, their careers, their evolution, their ambitions in a very realistic and grounded way to business school. Brands matter, yes, but what also matters is the evolution of your career within the industry that you have chosen. Okay, you need to be able to understand how you can make the most of the place where you work, of the opportunities that are there. And these are things that you need to reflect on, much in advance of when you actually pen your resume and your application for business school. Next, you need to think about your goals and what your short and your long-term goals are. Now, this is one of the most important parts of your application because your entire application is going to be based on the kind of goals that you want to express to business school. You need to think about whether they're ambitious enough, whether they are grounded in the kind of work experience you've had, and whether, a lot of what you're doing really stands up to demonstrating to an admissions officer that you have indeed acted on your ambitions even before you have decided to apply to a business school. So this helps them understand how they would, how the school's resources are going to benefit you and how they can set you up for success for your immediate post-MBA goal, as well as help you on the path to, your long-term vision. You need to also think about demonstrated leadership. Whenever you position your application to business school, you need to think about, how you have created impact so far and what do you want to do post your MBA? What do you want to do in terms of what is the impact that you want to create? What are the lives that you want to impact? What are the business problems that you want to work on? And what are the solutions that you see yourself really offering the world or the sector that you plan to be a part of? You need to also then think about extracurricular activities. What defines you should not only be your professional life or your career, but you need to also demonstrate to the school that you are someone who is a meaningful part of various communities. So whether that community is, of course, your workplace and your colleagues, but it's also what you do outside of work, whether it is impacting a single individual, whether it's impacting our communities in terms of work that you do with them, but you need to really demonstrate to them who you are as a well-rounded person. The last is, of course, the fit. When you look at MBA programs, you need to really understand not only the academic resources that are going to benefit you, but you also need to think about whether elements or whether the school's ethos resonates with your own value system, and whether what the school offers you as a larger community is a community that you really want to be a part of, that you see yourself contributing to meaningfully. So these are elements that all these elements are pieces that you need to reflect on before you actually start working on your application, or indeed before you even start thinking about shortlisting schools that you're going to apply to. We always encourage people to take a screenshot of this particular slide or to revisit it at different points in their application process, because it will help you to ground your MBA application and your thought process at various points during the year. With that, we're going to come to today's panel and the discussion that we're going to have. I would like each of you to introduce yourselves. What we would like you to cover during that introduction is, of course, your name and, of course, the university that you attended, your graduation, where you've done your graduation from, the degree that you have. But we'd also like you to talk about the places where you work, where you're working currently, and the schools that you apply to, and, of course, where you're finally going. So I'd like to start off with, maybe we could call on Sangamitra, and then we'll take it from there.
Hi, everyone.
You're a little low. The audio is a little low volume. So what we'll do, Sangamitra, is we will move on and give you an opportunity to just check on that. So we'll move on to Nisar. Nisar, why don't you start us off?
Hey, sure. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So thanks for that introduction, Natasha, and I can attest to every word that she just said in the last 10 minutes. I think the Red Pen team has been uniquely helpful to all of us. As for a quick introduction of myself, so I did my undergrad from IIT Bombay, a BTech in Material Sciences, and I did a BA in Economics from Mumbai University, after which I worked for 2.5 years at a distressed investing private equity firm called India Resurgence Fund for 2.5 years. And then I moved on to a global PE fund by the name of Warburg Pincus, where I was until this April. In terms of the schools and the applications, I had applied to Harvard, Wharton, Chicago Booth, and Columbia. And I was fortunate enough to receive admits from Wharton and Chicago Booth, and I finally decided to go with Wharton. And I know we can come back to this in the Q&A, but a lot of your participants might be from the backgrounds of private equity, finance, and consulting. I think a large challenge of what I had was diversifying and sort of differentiating my application from such a voluminous pool, which just seems to get larger and larger every year. So I'd be happy to discuss that later on in the panel. But over to you and the other candidates, and a huge congratulations to everyone on this panel.
Thanks, Nisarg. Nisarg, just, out of curiosity, what do you
Yeah.
think, if I were to ask you, is the one thing that you felt set you apart from other applicants?
And this, it's a very good question. And I think this would apply to everyone, not just from a background like mine. I think it is to be, it's very tempting to try and exaggerate or try and be someone that you're not, because, you see it the other way. Like if you're applying to a school like, say, Stanford, you're like, oh, what does Stanford want in an applicant? And then you sort of try to mold yourself. I would say, while that's very tempting, the best piece of advice I received was to be the opposite. It was to uniquely be true to yourself. In every single line that you write in your essay, you should reflect back and see, can any one of my peers write this line down? Right? It should be very true to me. It should speak to who I am as a person. It doesn't have to be just about my job. It can be beyond a lot of things. So I would say, don't try to fit into some imaginary mold that you think the schools are looking for. The schools receive 10,000 applications every year. And I think the AdCom can see this sort of, I guess, fakery or, whatever, exaggeration from a mile away. So don't get tempted by that just because you feel like you have 10 others from your office applying with the same background. Just spend a little more time, dig a little deeper, and ask yourself who you are as a person, what your values are, and whether, what you're conveying in the essay, would it apply? Put yourself in the shoes of your colleague and say, can my colleague write this line down? If yes, then you're not introspecting enough. Then you're leaving a lot on the table by not being unique and introspecting and bringing out your personality.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, Nisarg. We're going to talk about this further during the discussion. So thank you. I'm going to move on to Malvika. Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much to the TRP team for having me here today and for guiding me throughout my MBA applications journey. So to start with, academically, I'm a software engineer. I did my engineering from Pune University, after which it was a natural progression to enter into the world of IT. There, I did it for almost 1.5 years, but then I realized that I had a higher purpose, a bigger calling, because of which I entered into the field of entrepreneurship, and specifically in the field of social impact, because I believe that I wanted to give back to the society something which probably a lot of people could not get. And I started my work with helping farmers. I help them connect to the urban consumers through my agrotech platform. The company's name is the Organic Carbon, where I'm currently the co-founder and the co-CEO. At the same time, I was blessed to be funded by Shark Tank India investors as well as other angel investors. And I believe that this helped me in portraying my journey forward, because I was not just highlighting my achievements, but at the same time showing my failures, the vulnerabilities that I had during my entrepreneurship journey. And so in my MBA journey, in my MBA application journey, I applied to Oxford, Cambridge, and London Business School. I was happy to be receive an invite and in fact admit as well as scholarship from all the three. So, but then I finalized to go with Oxford because it aligned with what my vision was for the future.
Yeah.
And so that's it from my side.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of engaging stories around that. We're really going to touch on some of them, Malvika, during the process of the questions. So, I mean, it's great to know that. So I'm going to move on now and ask you, Karan, if you could, introduce yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Natasha. Thanks for having us here. I remember I attended a similar call like during my application process and it was really helpful for me. So thank you for having all of us here. And I think I relate very heavily with everything Nisarg and Malvika said. So thanks, guys. Yeah, so I did my undergrad from St. Xavier's in Calcutta. I also pursued chartered accountancy while I was in college. Then I joined Swiggy as my first job. I was part of the strategy team. I worked there for 2 years. I was with them through 2 waves of COVID. So that was an insane journey in itself. And then I spent the last 2 years building products for students and teachers. I led product at a nonprofit called Avanti Fellows. I applied to Kellogg, Berkeley, Tuck, and Columbia in the first round, and Stanford in the second round. And I'm finally going to Stanford.
Okay, thank you for that. Karan, what do you think helped you
Sure.
stand out in the application?
I think I inherently have a very atypical profile. I'm a finance grad who's been spending time in tech. So that I think essentially helped me stand out from the get-go. But I think I was also able to really connect the dots well and tie back all of the decisions I took across my career um, with a lot of deep thought behind why I took those decisions. And also I was able to tie them back with the one great passion I have, which is education. And that goes back to my childhood. My mother is a teacher. So I think I was able to use the atypicalness of my profile well, I think.
Yeah, I think that is true. And we're going to again touch on that as well. I'm now going to go to Sangamitra. I just want to check if you're able to hear us and if you will be able to introduce yourself right now.
I hope it's a lot better now in terms of like audio. Okay,
Yes.
awesome. Hi, everyone. And again, thank you so much, Natasha, for having me on this panel. You've done so much to help me through the application process. I'm happy to kind of be doing this to help other folks as well. So everyone, I'm Sangamitra Sachindran. And I did my bachelor's in electronics and communications engineering from NIT Trichy. I think very early into my degree, I realized that EC wasn't for me. So then I kind of looked out for other opportunities and I started off my career at PwC US Advisory. I did consulting in mainstream B2C consulting for a while, but then eventually my plan was to switch into the social impact space. Like I want to look as consumers as people to help and not necessarily sort of just as a business proposition. That's really where I made my switch to Sattva Consulting, which is where I'm a manager now. I focus on impact investor advisory, and I work with European as well as Japanese investor clients to help them look at impact and ESG as integral parts of what they hope to get via their investments, in addition to just the value and the sort of ROI on it, right? I applied to a couple of schools in 2021. I'm going to be honest, that didn't work out for me. So I think that's also something that's really important to talk about. But then fast forward to 2023, I decided to just apply to INSEAD because I think I was very clear on who I was. I think I had a lot more clarity as an individual in terms of who I am, but the best fit for me is in terms of the school. And I just chose to apply to that one school and I got in with a scholarship, so I'm going there. In terms of, I think, what helped me stand out as an applicant, I think one is just that clarity, like I mentioned. I've done a ton of introspection over the years, not just because I wanted to get into B school, but I think that's just who I also am as a person. And I think that introspection really allowed me to join the dots, as Karan said, in a way that was, I personally feel like I did a pretty unique job of it, but maybe Natasha can speak better to that. So that was one part. I think the other thing that I also really showcase in my application, which matters a lot to INSEAD, is my cultural intelligence. And then I was able to tie that core trait of mine with what I really want to do as an investor impacting consumers in the global south. I think cultural intelligence is a very, very important component of what INSEAD looks for. And it's something I bring to the table naturally, and it ties into my future goals. So yeah, I think that's the long and short of it. Over to you, Natasha, for the other questions.
Okay, so I think all of you have given us a lot of food for thought, and we're going to explore that during our discussion now. I see we're getting questions already. So, during the course of the discussion, I'll try and, address some of that as best as I can. And of course, whatever we don't, we're going to pick up, at the end of our discussion. So I think I'm going to kick off with perhaps the most important question, and we've had a good segue into that with, all of you introducing yourselves and talking about the uniqueness of your profile. But what I really want to start is the big question of, the timing of you applying for your MBA. Why did you feel that this was the right time for each of you, to apply? And I'm going to first put this out to all of you because I really want to get your initial thoughts before we talk about this further. So, any of you can start this off.
I'll take a crack at it.
Yeah.
I think after 4-5 years of like solid work experience, I think I was just able to really realize what I am good at, what I value, and what is it that I want to do in the long term. So like sort of the intersection of all of that. And that helped me realize why I want to do an MBA, which was to one really build a lot on my personal development skills, because I think I didn't have a really great university experience because I was mostly busy studying for my CA exams. So I think, I think just being able to answer those three very fundamental questions of, hey, what am I really passionate about? What am I really good at? And what do I want to do like in the long term with my life? I think, that helped me realize where the value of an MBA would come in. And that is why I applied.
Yeah. Malvika, you had also raised your hand. So would you like to add to that?
Yes, so it's very similar to what Karan said, that having a significant work experience of 7 to 8 years, a large part of which was entrepreneurship. And in my case, because I did not have a typical formal business degree or a business education, everything that I did was through the learnings and the mistakes and the experiences that I got. And even though I could broaden my perspectives by talking to people, talking to mentors, and taking their guidance, but a time came where I felt that I needed to broaden my horizons more, explore something which was beyond what I am currently in, the people that I was amongst. And that's why I thought that this would be a right time to shape myself, to upskill myself. So I think this was a point in my career where I individually felt that now is the perfect time to go for an MBA.
Okay, that's great. Nisal Sangamitra, which of you would like to go first?
Maybe Nisar, you go first. Okay, sure, I can go as well.
Go ahead.
Okay, all right. I think I've roughly spent the same amount of time in my career as Karan, so I kind of resonate with some of what he said, which is I've been working for about a little over 5 years now. And I think I've always been looking to create an impact in some way or the other. And I think I realized that it was via investments that I felt I would be able to create sort of a more sustainable and widespread impact as a point of influence in the entire ecosystem. Investors really kind of they're in the position to really push their portfolio companies to do something impactful by way of the position they hold in that relationship. So I think for me, when I came to that realization, I actually, within my firm as well, I helped start our most recent business unit that focuses on impact investor advisory. I think I reached a point of maturity where I'd been networking with a lot of clients. I'd worked with them on these problem statements, and then I felt very ready to now make that shift. And that's really what sort of drove me to then apply to school, because I felt I was at the right point where I kind of understand the industry. I know how it functions to a certain extent, and I'm really looking to build that business intuition so that I can become an investor myself. So I think to round off my experiences, I wanted this next in my journey, and then that's really sort of what.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I'll just add. So I'm fortunate, but I've worked in a very structured environment.
Yeah.
And generally the sort of programs that major bulge bracket B firms have are sort of a 2 to 3 year pre-MBA analyst or associate role, after which they encourage you to go for an MBA. The rationale of that being that, the sort of hard skills that you need to be in finance and to be an investor, your financial modeling, understanding numbers, you sort of build that over 2 or 3 years. What you don't really get and what sort of puts you in the level of a VP or a principal are some of the softer skills, right? Where you're the face of the firm, where you're negotiating with other parties, where you're dealing with, like Sangamitra mentioned, portfolio companies on a day-to-day basis. The sort of, the soft skill of trying to balance multiple interests, the interests of your investors versus the interests of your portfolio companies. Those sort of skill sets, I saw B School application as a way to enhance that sort of skills. I moved from the hard skills to the soft skills. So, some examples are Wharton has a course on negotiations. So that's one of the major things I wanted to attend and learn. There's another course by Adam Grant on organizational behavior, which I realized when I work at a portfolio company, understanding even some simple things like if I have to deliver a message, do I go straight to the CEO, or is there a chain of command that I have to follow so that someone under him does not feel sort of insulted? So these kind of softer dynamics, which you really need to be active and think on. It's something that I really wanted to learn if I wanted to make that next step as an investor, from just someone who's crunching numbers and making models to someone who's actually the face of the firm. And after working in finance for 5 years, I did feel like I had hit a plateau of sort of analytical skills. There wasn't more to gain there. But what really I had to gain were these sort of courses. So I worked backwards. I saw what the gaps in my skill. So I knew what it takes to be a VP or a principal because I'd seen that around. Then I sort of saw what skill sets I had, and then what skills I would need to bridge that gap. And therefore, I researched the schools which would provide me with those sort of skills. And, the course that I mentioned, and forward to be attending those courses at Wharton. So that was sort of my, why, and both why now.
That's great. That's great. So I'm now going to work backwards and go to the beginning of your journey. And let's talk about test prep. Let's talk about standardized testing and, what it meant to you. Did you opt for the GMAT, the GRE? And, if you had to give one piece of advice on test prep to anyone who's going through that stress right now, what would it be? And I'm going to start with you, Sangamitra, this time.
Sure, yeah, happy to. So I took the GRE, and I think at the time that I took it, the reason I took the GRE was because it was about 4 years ago, so it's not a recent thing that I did. And at that point in time, I think I was considering potentially maybe a slightly more technical degree that would then bring me into impact. So GRE would kind of do both. It would allow me to apply for an MBA as well as an MS if I wanted that, right? But I think do we have to mention test scores? What's the?
Is it comfortable?
Okay, sure, yeah. I got a 337 on 340 on my GRE. And I think the one piece of advice I would have for test takers, right, is I think identify your strengths. Actually, two pieces of advice, sorry. Identify your strengths. If you feel like you would do better on a GMAT exam, understand the format, understand the types of questions, understand that it's an adaptive test format. Versus a GRE, which is a little different. Your quant is different. Your verbal is a little different. I think just say identify and play to your strengths. There's no shame in that. I think be confident about doing that. And the second part is for me, what I did is I just really sort of took one prep material and I just stuck with that for like a couple of months. So I know that some of my friends took tests from like a bunch of places, like 5 different textbooks and 5 different providers. I feel that kind of detracts from the momentum you can build for the test. So I just really kind of stuck with one practice material, and I did that for about 3 months, and it turned out to be good for me. And I take a lot of practice tests. Yeah.
Okay, Malvika, would you like to go next?
So in my case, a game changer for me was making an error log. And I would refer to that error log every single day. Sometimes it would take me hours to just go through the error log because of the number of mock tests that I had given. But I think that every time understanding that a particular question or a type of question, the kind of approach that I had and the correct approach to be taken, because that is how I build my mental model slowly over a period of time. And because I was away from formal education for a period of 7 to 8 years and then going back, and I started the journey pretty late. I started studying for GMAT at somewhere around mid July, I believe, and the first round applications was somewhere around September. But it took me a little bit longer. I gave the exam in October, but I believe that the 3-4 months that I did, And between the difference between my first GMAT and my second GMAT attempt, the difference was only and only a error log that I made, and I've stuck to that error log no matter what.
And how much did you finally, what was the score you submitted finally?
So I submitted a score of 690, which is actually an average score for Indians applying to these the colleges that I did too.
Yeah. But, I think it's important to mention over here that while we always talk about standardized test scores being the base of your application, it's not the be all and end all of your application. And, the various elements that we discussed are, critical in understanding, how school fitment would work. So, I mean, thanks for that insight, Malvika. Nisar, would you tell us a little bit about your journey? The test prep?
Sure. Yeah, sure. I think both Sangamitra and Malvika hit the nail on the head, because I did both of those things. I would say mock tests, very, very important. You don't want your final attempt. So just a quick background, I took the GMAT as well.
Okay.
You don't want your first full attempt to be when you actually go to the center. I know a lot of people sort of say, okay, I'll just do the verbal section, I'll just do the quant section, I'll just do the essay, IR. But I think you have to sit through the whole test. You have to acclimatize your body. What I also did, just to add a further nuance, was I took all my mock tests in the same slot that I had booked my final GMAT test, just to sort of prime my body. You don't want it to be at a time where you're sort of napping or your mind is switched off. And I would say, so I took, for the 4 weekends leading up to my test, I took a mock test each, and that's all I did that day. That's one. And the second, when Malvika mentioned the error log, again, very, very fantastic piece of advice, especially for the GMAT, because the GMAT, one of your core skills is pattern recognition. The entire exam is based on certain patterns of questions. You may not get the same question, but you will get the same type of question over and over. And if you're consistently making the same mistakes and not learning from it, you're leaving a lot on the table, which is where the error log comes into play. It helps you recognize patterns, especially patterns which you're weaker at, far easier than not having an error log. The third piece of advice, and maybe it might be a late for a few students, but I was lucky to receive it when I was in my undergrad, is I took the GMAT in 2018, the year I graduated, because it does become a little difficult to balance professional work and education at the same time. So if there are any panelists who are sort of in their undergrad or their first year of work, I would say it's now not too early. Don't push it out till later, because during application season, you have a lot of things to look at it. You have to brainstorm your essays. You sort of don't want to divert your mind share. So do it at a time, or at least do it maybe 9 months out. Don't do it at a time where you're battling on multiple fronts, where you're also trying to speak to recommenders, you're also trying to brainstorm your essays. At least the GMAT is an exam that needs that sort of respect. It needs at least 4 to 6 weeks of, I would say, hardcore prep, mock tests and error logs.
Yeah.
And in terms of my score, I was fortunate to receive a 770 on my GMAT.
Yeah. And that's great advice, Nisarg. I mean, that is something that we always tell applicants, that take the standardized test, when you're ready. Don't have many things on your mind, including your application, at the point, when you're trying to get into the mindset of being, that test taker, that optimal test taking mindset for you.
Yeah.
Because, that's when you'll do your best, when you're just not stressed. Karan, would you give us your insight into test prep, your top
Sure.
tip?
I think I echo everything like Nisarg, Sangamitra, and Malvika said. I took the GMAT as well. I only had 2 months because I decided that I want to apply to B schools in late April, and I wanted to also apply in round 1. So one piece of advice: definitely give yourselves a little bit more time than 2 months. And I got a 740. I got a Q50 and a V41. As far as I remember. And yeah, I think I spent very little time. I think I spent none of my time focusing on the fundamental concepts, because the fundamentals are all high school math and English. I spent most of my time just practicing questions and mock tests. And like everyone else said, I think having a mistake focused approach and constantly practicing questions at the edge of your ability, and then constantly fixing your mistakes, I think that is the best way to get better at taking this test.
Yeah. And I think you all have shared very valuable advice, because that's also something that we speak to potential applicants about, that it's not about, you cannot assign all your self-worth to that test score, but it's important to understand and identify mistakes, understand them, and just work on rectifying them, rather than getting stressed about an overall score. So I mean, thank you, all of you, for that advice. I'm sure it's going to benefit, everyone who's listening in today. I now want to talk about, school selection. And, all of you have applied to very, very diverse schools, even, whether you've applied to a single school or multiple. And I just want to understand whether there was any strategy to the way you went about it. How did you know, like, this is the school, like, this is where I want to apply from all the options available? Here are, the few schools that I think really resonate with who I am. And I think we would really benefit from understanding that strategy. So this time I'm going to go with Karan first.
I think a lot of it was gut and how I felt when I spoke to the students from that school. I'll be really honest. I think Stanford, I would have applied even if I wouldn't have got a good feeling after talking to the students, because that was just like a childhood dream that I've always had. So even in my first call, I remember I spoke to Natasha about applying to Stanford, and because and also because all of my goals tie in with the kind of environment Stanford and Berkeley and Kellogg sort of have. I wanted to go somewhere where there was a lot of focus on tech, and a lot of the job opportunities that came out of the MBA were in the tech sector. I also wanted to go somewhere where the Indian alumni base was strong, because I knew that I wanted to come back and I wanted to leverage that when I come back to India. Uh, Third is I also wanted to go I'm sort of an introvert, so I enjoy like closer social settings. So I also wanted to go to a place where the class size was not huge. So Stanford and Berkeley have some of the smallest class sizes. But yeah, but a lot of it was based on the gut feeling that I got when I spoke to students from that school.
Yeah, I mean, that's very true. I'm going to move on now and ask Malvika about her strategy.
In my case, I consider different phenomena other than just talking to people. Like, that is definitely one of the most important things. But I consider the location, the language. So because I was not aware of multiple foreign languages, so it kind of took me away from certain B schools that first I was initially targeting. But then I reflected as to not just that, but also the duration of the MBA was very important for me. Having been in the workforce for a very long time, I was not willing to stay away from it also for a longer duration. I wanted to be back into the workforce as soon as possible. And so a 1 year MBA was something which fit into my criteria. Being that saying that there are very limited options when it comes to 1 year MBA, majority of them being in UK, and even some in France as well. But then I started seeing what are the values that the B school shares and I share at the same time. Something which is more social impact oriented, and giving me a lot more options when it comes even to clubs, because it's not just the education that you get from the classrooms, but also the clubs. And the social impact club of Oxford, as well as of LBS, was something that I resonated a lot with. And these were some prime characteristics that attracted me mostly to apply to such schools.
Okay, all right. Nisar?
Yeah, sure. I think, yeah, the first thing what Karan mentioned is, speaking to people. See, basically what you're trying to establish from that is each business school has a particular ethos, which can be summarized in like one sentence, which you're trying to get at. You're trying to understand what that school stands for. What a Stanford stands for is very different from what a Harvard may stand for, is very different from what a Wharton or a Chicago Booth stands for. So in my personal experience, right, by speaking to people who are at Chicago Booth, who are at Wharton, I realized that these are very data-driven analytical schools, right? You're trying to answer questions by justifying them through large volumes of data. I think that is something that speaks to me, that spoke to my being as a person, which then helped me translate into the essay, because I knew that, this is sort of what the school stands for. This is what I'm looking to get at. So I would say speak to alumni, speak to professors if you can, speak to current students, understand what the school stands for, because that is essentially also in a way what school is looking for. And then be true to yourself. Don't try to fit into a mold that doesn't work for you. Choose the particular school that has that same ethos. Another thing I did was, like I touched upon earlier, was I researched all the various courses at different schools, which will again help you. And the way I saw it was from a skill set kind of building. So if you see the schools that I also applied to, like a CBS, a Wharton, a Chicago Booth, I knew I wanted to get back into finance. So I wanted schools which have, the best finance professors, the best placements in finance. So all of that sort of helped drive my decision,
Okay.
if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much for that insight, Mr. Now, Sangamitra, you applied to one school. So I think you were very focused on what was the one for you. So can you just give us an insight into that?
Yeah, I think it had a lot to do with, I feel like NCR was a school that I'd been exposed to from a cultural lens long before I even started to speak to alumni from NCR, because the co-founder and CEO of the firm that I work at, Satva Consulting, he's an NCR alum himself. Okay. And he's somebody that I've worked with closely, and I've seen his style of leadership. And it's one of the most flat, non-hierarchical, open and empathetic styles of leadership that I've seen. And I've worked at two places, one at a Big Four, and then also now at like a homegrown Indian, and now sort of spreading internationally type of firm. So I think for me, seeing that in my own life and watching him live that culture, it also taught me that NCR was probably a school that allowed him to nurture that side of him as a leader and didn't really kind of stifle that and kind of replace it with something that's a little more, I'm not sure what the right term for that would be, but whatever, like, there's different styles of leadership. So for me, I think that one influence in my life has played an important role in me sort of gravitating towards that school very intuitively. But I think there are a couple of other factors as well, which is, I was not raised in India. Even through my work at PwC, I travel quite a bit. I've always been, at any point in time, I would say, interacting with people from, say, 5 to 6 different cultures. And I feel like I fit in really well in environments like that, where, there is no one culture that is in the majority. I feel it creates a sense of just innate equality, even if you're not trying to force it, because there's no one segment in the majority, and his sort of the balance of power is really equal in that sense. So I think, all of these are very qualitative reasons. They're not so much data backed and all of that, but this is, I think, one of the very important things that I looked at when I felt sort of drawn to NCR in terms of fit. The other two things that matter to me, like Malvika said, is that location and the duration of the course. Though I've just been working a little upwards of 5 years, I felt that I didn't want to spend too much time out of the workforce. I wanted to get back and become an impact investor ASAP. And Europe is also one of the geographies that is furthest ahead in terms of impact investing, ESG, in terms of regulations, just the number of investors that are actually seriously taking that up. So yeah, for me, location, duration of course, and I think just ultimately the style of leadership that's honed at that school, and diversity were sort of my factors.
Yeah, all excellent reasons. And I know how into the culture you were when, we worked on, answering those questions, right? So that's great.
Yeah.
I'm now going to come to a very critical part, which I think everyone wants to know about, which is, developing your narrative through your essays, and all of you have attempted, we're from very different backgrounds, and, you have very different motivations. So I'd like to really focus on how you went about developing your essays. And I think the first thing I'm going to talk about is, just the authenticity and what it means to be authentic in your essays. I mean, the one message that every business adcom will always put out is that what they're really looking for is, just understanding your truth. Just understanding what is it that you want to put across to them, right? And I think we've touched on some of these elements earlier when we Malvika spoke about failure, and Nisarg, you spoke about authenticity in terms of representing yourself and what matters to you. But I really want to understand, how did you approach authenticity in your essays, in your application essays? And here I'd like to start with Malvika first.
So for authenticity, I genuinely, it was a moment of self-reflection. I took some time out, dedicated time out, where I did not sit. There was this entire big fat document given to me by TRP, which literally, made me look into myself and understand my characteristics, my traits, and even my lifelong journey. Because you generally don't journal through this, you. But then I dwelled into my past. I dwelled into my childhood as well, and a little did I realize that this will have an impact on why I'm doing MBA or what my journey has been all this while. So then when I realized that I'm not just an entrepreneur or just not an engineer, I am an actor too. I have been acting, I've been a part of the drama circle for so long, but I never really thought that it would impact my MBA journey in any way. But these were certain small little things that the TRP team, in fact, helped me to understand that this is valuable. This is what differentiates you from the rest. And this is what you need to put it on the paper. So I think self reflection is the number one, but the second one would be that to give the equip the team of TRP that these are the small snippets of my life that have happened with me. These are my experiences, and how can I make the best use of it? So giving them the opportunities to explore myself. It's because sometimes a lot of people, they don't say a lot, thinking that okay, this is something which is very trivial, but it has a very big impact on your application or even on your life. So that I feel is very necessary, and it's just not a one day process or a couple of hours process. It needs to be over a pretty long period. The longer you spend on thinking about yourself, the better it is.
Yeah, and I think that's great insight, Malvika, because the document that you're referring to is something that we give out to to clients when they start working with us, and I feel that self-reflection is really an important part of the narrative that you're going to put together for business school, and just understanding patterns and linkages between important milestones in your life. It really helps us have a much better discussion with you in terms of how we'd like you to maybe think on things that you've never thought about in years. So that's great insight. Sangamitra, you were nodding along, so do you want to talk about how you developed authenticity for your essay narratives?
Yeah. So I think Malvika, thanks for touching upon that document, because that document is one of the most insightful, and I think it's insane. Like, what you guys have done with that document. And I'll maybe sort of take a step back and talk about how I approached it and how that document, despite having done a ton of self-reflection, how still that document really helped me. And I think that's really the value in it, right? So I spent a lot of time, like Malvika said, reflecting on my stories. I think I've had an innate sense of events in my life that have led me to other events, and that sort of are at the very core of why I want to do certain things. And I think I had that awareness because I made a very conscious choice to enter the social impact space, and those choices were already driven by that awareness. And I think I was very unabashed in talking about stories that I felt were important to me. I told myself that, ultimately, I want a school to accept me if they resonate with my story. And I think sometimes you should be confident enough to say that, which is, I want the school to accept me if they really want me. And if they don't really want me, you know what, I'm okay with not getting that admit. And I think that's a strong stance when you take within yourself. I feel it gives you a lot more confidence and just spontaneity in the entire process, which sometimes can be lacking because it's so stressful and you really want to get into school. Being confident of say that, you know what, if you don't like me, it's okay if you don't take me in. And when you do that, you instantly become somebody who's sort of very confident of your stories. You're very direct with your interviewers in your essays and all of that. So I think I somewhere took that decision, and I feel that actually played out really well for me because I feel like I'm under no illusion of, or I'm not confused about why I got in. I mean, I don't need to sound arrogant, but let's just be honest, right? Yeah. So one is, I think, that journey of reflection and taking that stand very strongly to be who you are and not worrying if somebody doesn't like who you are. The second part of it was, despite doing all of this reflection, I had these stories placed somewhere in my timeline, but that questionnaire or that document that, the Red Pen shared with me really allowed me to draw some connections that I hadn't drawn myself. And I think that's really where some of the magic happened, where some of my essays that were that contained all of the most important stories, but some of the most important insights may not have been coming out. I think that's really where I feel that document really makes a difference, and it can be a game changer. And I would, that's something that I personally feel was the most interesting part of my journey with the Red Pen, and also I think reflected very well on my application at the end.
Yeah, yeah. And I think there was a lot of material for you to then put across INSEAD's six, very extensive essays. So I think that's like a great strategy when you have so many essays and so many facets of, your journey to cover in in your application. So, Nisar, what about you?
Sure. Um, yeah, I think what a lot of people try to do, and what I was guilty of in the beginning, is try to position themselves as sort of the finished product, right? Try to put their best foot forward in all sort of aspects. But I found that approach to be a little paradoxical, because if you have everything figured out, you don't really need an MBA, right? I think what Malvika touched on was fantastic. It's sort of working backwards in a sort of way that you embrace your vulnerabilities. I don't think there's any moment where any person is more authentic than when they are true to themselves about their shortcomings. So taking the time out to, and not in a sort of critical way, in just to sort of, detach yourself, view yourself from a third person view, and be very just, in a way, be very rational and clinical about it. Just see that, if I were someone who was observing, and speak to your friends, speak to people who you trust, and just understand, who do you see Nisarg, who do you see Malvika, Karn, Sangamitra, anyone as a person, what are his positives, what are his negatives, and then focus on those vulnerabilities and find out which sort of vulnerabilities you're sort of fine with, because there are a lot of vulnerabilities that make us ourselves, right? I don't want to, in a way, some of them I embrace, but some of them I wish to improve upon. Like some sort of things I would say is, I can be a little confrontational at work. I can be very my way or the highway. That is something I want to change. Now think about times where that has sort of affected you negatively, right? And that can now become a part of your story. Say that, had I done this better, I could have done this. And how will sort of, being at this school, being in this environment, being with these people, help me change that and be the person I want to become. So I think that genuinely helped me. I instead of starting with your strengths first, start with your weaknesses first. That way you can be more authentic. Don't try to be the finished article, especially if you're sort of exaggerating, because they can smell that from a mile away. B schools genuinely like people who are self-aware. I think self-awareness is a very key trait. And yeah, just I guess, yeah, that would be my advice.
Yeah, and that's true, Nisarg. I think one of the things that I'd want to mention is that it's human nature that we focus on some aspects of our life more than others, and those get repeated through personal life and they get repeated through professional life when we talk about ourselves. And what we really need you to do when you are applying to MBA school is to just step back and really think about going beyond stories that are you generally accept about yourself. And just don't be scared to be vulnerable, because it's only when you put down everything that you feel about yourself, about milestones in your life, that it's possible to really for you to see certain key motivations. So that's great advice. Karan, would you like to talk about how you approached it? Because you also had a tremendous range of schools that you applied to. So why don't you talk about authenticity in essays?
Sure. I think the rest of the panelists have given like superb advice. I think I'll echo everything that they have said. I think the GTKY document that TRP offers is not just an MBA hack, it is sort of a life hack. So I think that was one of the key reasons I think I can attribute to my getting an admission offer from my dream school. I think I'll add just one like additional point on top of what everyone already said. I think it's not a very easy thing to be authentic. I think society in general doesn't do a great job in creating a safe space for all of us to be our most authentic selves. So I think just acknowledge that it will be a difficult process that you'll go through. Um, uh, Also, try and find yourself a great partner you are working with, someone who can create that safe space for you, where you're able to showcase your vulnerabilities and be honest with yourself, and like be brutally honest and like deeply introspect. I think I had Riddhi with me, who's a lead consultant at TRP, and I had conversations with her that I have I haven't even had with a lot of my closest family members. So I think just finding that partner for yourself through this application process, who you can be comfortable with, is really, really important. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I think.
Yeah, and that's, that's thank you for that, Karan. I think it is difficult to go beyond generally accepted stories, and it is difficult to go beyond preconceived notions, because you've had 20 plus years of living those notions about yourself and who you are, and sometimes it's challenging what you accept about yourself. Can take time. So I would say that one piece of advice that I would give anyone who's attending this is, like Nisar said at the start, don't look at what the school is about and try and, tailor your story to what the school, you think the school would like to hear. You really need to understand the nuances of who you are, and then learn about, work with someone to understand how you want to portray what is the message that you want to give out. What is it that you know about yourself after deep reflection? I'm now going to come to another very key part of the application, which is, the interview process. And, all of you have experience with very, very different, interview formats. You understand how you would like to prepare for it. I mean, you've now gone through the grind. So I'm going to start with you, Nisarg, because what I really want to understand from you is the insights that you can give anyone who's planning to apply to Wharton about the Wharton skill-based discussion. How did you prepare for it? And is there, any top tips that you'd like to give someone preparing for it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I guess it's a very unique interview process. So basically, it's a team-based discussion where you, along with 5 other panelists, are given a prompt beforehand. Around, I would say, 2 weeks beforehand, you're given a prompt where you have to sort of develop your story about it. And then after that, you're given around 30 minutes of a team discussion. You usually take around 90 seconds to 1 minute to 90 seconds to discuss your prompt. Everyone else does the same, and you have around 25 minutes to sort of discuss with your colleagues on that video call. And then you have 5 more minutes to present what your group has come together with. I think there are a lot of nuances to the Wharton interview, which I can discuss in detail. But the key piece of advice there is you want to switch from being in talking mode to being in active listening mode. What active listening is different from listening in the sense that you're not just letting things wash over you. Try and take a keen interest in what someone is saying. You gain a lot of insights about the other person through that. Try and involve other people. Try and make it lead with curiosity first, right? You genuinely want to understand where the other person is coming from, what their point of view is. You will have people joining from different geographies, which will sort of influence their answers. So try and understand where they are coming from. Don't try and hog the space. Be respectful of everyone else's time. It isn't about, trust me, it isn't about who hammers their point home. That strategy backfires. A lot of people think that, I need to maximize my airspace. I need to make sure my this thing is selected. Most of the people who get into Wharton actually don't have their idea selected. It isn't about forcing through your case. It's about being able to work in a team. It's about being respectful. It's about respecting people with your active listening. So those sort of things. So yeah, I guess those are the basic pieces of advice. There are a lot more nuances to the Wharton interview, which I would be happy to discuss offline should anyone get in touch with me.
That's great, Nisarg. And I think one of the key elements is with the Wharton TBD doing, a mock with other individuals. I think it's also important because, it helps you hone, how you listen to others and, how you interact with them. So yeah. I cannot, emphasize that enough. It's something that not only do you need to do research, but you also need to understand how you interact in a group. What is your safe space in a group? So
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I think that's a very good point you mentioned, because a lot of us need that sort of feedback. We may think in our heads, I thought in the beginning when I went into the mocks that, I'm being friendly, but then I got the feedback from a lot of people that, you're trying to force it. It's not coming naturally to you. So we have a lot of sort of preconceived notions of how we speak. And unless you have a sort of neutral moderator who's taking it on board, so get as much feedback as you can, make those changes. And yeah, do with everything in this process, right? Even with the essays, with the tests, do mocks, go through iterations. You're not going to reach the finished article immediately. You're only going to get better with practice.
Yeah. And, for, Karan and for Sangamitra, you have some experience with also answering, video questions and, video interviews as such, at different stages. So is there any, any tips that you would give someone who's preparing for a video interaction?
And why don't you go first?
Sure. So I had to give a recorded interview for my Berkeley application. The format was that they have 5 questions, 3 of which are like very standard and similar across applicants. 2 are dynamics, so they're variable, they keep changing across applicants. One thing is, it's not a great experience to have. I think it's very discomforting to not have any feedback when you're like giving answers that are very like deeply personal. So it requires a lot of practice. But also, like, just record yourself, share it with other people, get a lot of feedback, but also try and not be very robotic, because at the end of the day, some person from the adcom team is going to look at this video and try and judge you. So it's very important to balance that fine line of practicing enough to pack in all of your content in 2 and 3 minutes, but also not being like super robotic when you're giving those answers.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, that's great advice. Sangamitra, something you would want to add to that you mentioned?
Yeah. So I think for INSEAD, the way it functions is that there is probably a large bank of questions that they have on their end, and you answer those questions live. So you have no time. You have, I think, about a minute to prepare and another minute. I'm forgetting the exact times, right? But it's all very short spans of time. You both prepare your answer and deliver it in front of the webcam. So I agree with Karan that it's very uncomfortable to sort of just be saying things when you have nobody nodding at you or sort of like, acknowledging your answers. The way I went about, I think, maybe mitigating some of that discomfort is I took a ton of those practice questions. So there's a Kira portal, which INSEAD houses its video essay questions on. You could do as many as 20, 30 practices, right? Which is, there's a person that comes, probably like an INSEAD faculty or a professor, asks the question, and then their picture kind of gets frozen on the screen and you have some time to sort of answer the question. So I did like about 15, 20 of those. I kind of oriented myself that, okay, sort of this is the expectation. I have to still be lively and interactive with the camera, despite the fact that no one's speaking back to me. I did that a couple of times, got a certain amount of comfortable. And I think that then helped me do my actual video essays a lot better, because I was already comfortable with the discomfort, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think that's how I went about orienting myself. And of course, just I think prep, because especially with schools that have these, and all 4 questions, there's no way I could predict them. It comes from a very large bank that they have. I don't know what's going to come at me. But there are still certain broad themes under which those questions exist. And you have questions online. You've got past people who talk about their experiences on these video essays. I think it's important to get your core narrative straight and just really focus on the top 2 or 3 things that you want to talk about for every question. It's easy to kind of ramble on, but I think just to control that, some prep beforehand makes a ton of a difference. So yeah.
That's great advice. And Malvika, I also want to get your thoughts on the conventional interviews and what would be your advice to someone who's preparing for a one-on-one interaction, either with alums or with, an AdCom member.
So there was one piece of advice which I got, and I think it was very nice, is that there's a very thin line between being confident and being arrogant. So a lot of times the purpose of the interview is to impress the interviewer, and we may just cross that thin line. So it was a conscious decision throughout in all my interviews to be calm, composed. In fact, in one of my interviews, because the interviewer had been interviewing all day long, and I was allocated the last slot of the day, he was tired. He had heard all sorts of answers, the typical answers, and every time I tried to answer, he would just cut me off, which I thought was a little rude, but I could understand from his perspective also, because he had conducted 10, 15 interviews in the entire day. So even I had to keep my calmness, my composure, that no matter what, no matter however I feel at the moment, but I need to be there in the moment and present myself in the best possible way without being rude, without being overconfident, and portray myself in the best way possible. So this is something that comes only through practice, because we may have all the answers to all the questions, but how do you conduct yourself during the interview is one of the key features, I believe.
Yeah. And I think being in the moment is something that every person should remember about, giving an interview. It's important not to get flustered. It's important not to worry about what you're going to answer, what will they ask next, but just focus on the answer that you're giving at that point in time, If I could, I'm just going to throw it open to, all four of you right now. If there's one thing that you would say you should not do during an interview, what would that be? One thing. Anyone can go first.
I could maybe go first because I have one thing here.
Yeah.
Don't make it all about you. I know it sounds odd because the interview is about you, questions being asked are about you, but I think it's really important to, humanize the interviewer. And that's something that I feel particularly strong about because I think I'm very conscious that this is a conversation. Even if the questions are a little bit structured and the person seems to come from a structured place, it's okay to, from your side, bring a little bit of spontaneity to the conversation, because I think it also helps loosen the interviewer up a little bit. And like Maldika rightly mentioned, in a lot of schools, the interviewer might have taken like 10 interviews that day, right? With INSEAD, it's a little different because they match you to alums, and then the alum the interview could go in any direction, right? They could say, let's take a walk around the building and do the interview. They could say, let's go to a coffee shop. They could say, come to my office. So it could really it's very conversational. I think it's important to not make the interview just about you. It's about you speaking to another person who's interested in understanding your capacities. And I think who the other person is and where they come from plays a very important role in that. So I ensured that even in the questions at the end of the interview, even in the way I spoke with him, I had 2 interviews for INSEAD, but I think in both my interviews, I was very conscious of who the other person is, and I ensured to actually ask the other person about themselves. So I'm not sure for how many schools this input will apply. In case you're talking to an admissions committee member, I'm not sure how those interviews work, but I think that's just one strong tip from me, especially if you're talking to students or alum who are taking the interview.
Yeah, that's great insight. I think that's great to know. I'm just going to say that we are past the 1 hour mark, but we do have a lot of questions. So, and they're addressed to, either each of you or, to all of you. So what I'd like to do at this point is, really take up these questions and get, insight from you guys about, some of the questions. I'm going to first also highlight one that is directed to you, Sanghamitra. In terms of INSEAD focuses a lot on international experience. Did you have that in your profile? And if someone doesn't have international experience, is it a huge disadvantage? Your opinion.
Got it. Thanks, Natasha. So okay, let me maybe collect my thoughts on this. So yes, INSEAD does focus on more than, I think, international experience. I would say it's a sort of, I think, like I touched upon this point earlier, it's about cultural intelligence. And I truly believe that you can have cultural intelligence without necessarily having worked abroad for a couple of years. Though, yes, having worked abroad for a couple of years or having worked in multiple countries definitely showcases that you've managed to adapt and actually thrive in another culture, which is maybe tangible proof of your cultural intelligence. But it's not necessarily the only way to showcase your cultural intelligence. So I would maybe shift that a little bit and say it's not international experience. That's just one tangible way of proving that trait of yours, but it's really the underlying trait that they're looking for. And for me, yes, I did. And like I said, I didn't grow up in India. So I think that did maybe work in my favor because I was exposed to a lot of cultures growing up for a very long period of time. And in both my jobs, I've always worked with international clients, with international counterparts, teams from other countries. I've also traveled a bit. So yes, in my case, that did sort of come in more sort of in your face in that sense. But if I were to sort of answer, if I were to sort of have an opinion on whether it's a huge disadvantage, I don't think I would necessarily say that. I mean, I'm not very confident saying that because I'm not the AdCom, but I think I would sort of encourage you to really reflect on your own experiences and try and understand the times where you were faced with people who were very different from you, and try and think about how you reacted in those situations, because I think that's really where you go to hunt for your cultural intelligence and how that translates into your relationships with people. So if you can identify such stories in your life and really bring out who you were in those situations, and there is there's a positive way in which you manage those situations, I think potentially that's something you should definitely put in within your application, and hopefully that should help.
Yeah, and
I don't think I
going to add-
conclusively answered that.
No, I'll just add to that. We have had individuals who have not necessarily had extended periods of time, working abroad, but there is definitely an understanding of they have a global mindset. They've put themselves in situations where they've had to interact with very, very different mindsets, and they have very consciously been able to bring, introspect on that and what it means to them. And is it something that's going to be a huge disadvantage if you don't have international experience? It isn't, but you definitely need to think about how you're going to indicate that you have a global mindset. So whether it is personal experiences in different cultures and amongst people from different cultures, whether it's work experience, whether it's volunteer work, whether it is other initiatives, you need to think about places where you've been able to demonstrate that in action, not just an armchair thought process, but where have you actually put yourself in situations where you've interacted with, very different mindsets. So that does count for a lot. I'm now going to just ask, any of you can answer this, but how did you finalize the location, like US, UK, or Singapore, where you wanted to study? And I'm also going to ask this question with a context that, a lot of you have spoken about, other aims, right, that you had. So Malvika, you spoke about the fact that you wanted specific kinds of programs which had a specific duration. You've spoken about linking the location, where you are, Sangamitra, for example, with the kind of post-MBA goals that you had. So is there any other criteria that had made you decide the location of where you wanted to study? I mean, from my understanding of your profiles, it seems to be more in terms of the program rather than a specific location. But if there's any other thought, please, let me know.
So maybe I can just take it. My answer is
Yeah.
pretty straightforward. I wanted to stay in finance, and for that, New York and the East Coast made the most sense for me. So if you see the schools that I applied to, they're mainly East Coast schools. So it wasn't much of a so I sort of knew where I saw myself post MBA and sort of made the decision basis that.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good answer, Nisar, because it just speaks to what we've been saying throughout, that you need to articulate what you want to do post MBA, and you need to articulate where do you see yourself best placed to achieve those goals, and then look at deciding on the program that you want to attend. My personal advice would be to, if you're considering a global program, research programs across different geographies, and really think about how they're going to link to what you want to do post the MBA, your personal or your professional goals of where you want to be when you take that decision. Another piece that I want to really talk about is, what would your advice be? And this is open to all of you. What would your advice be for students coming from smaller cities or smaller schools in tier 2 cities in India, hoping to get into, M7 schools with a fair work background in, there's a big name consulting firm like Deloitte or other consulting firms, and have founded a self brand? So do you think that there is some advice that you want to give someone who's from maybe a smaller educational institution, and how they should be thinking about their MBA?
Sure, maybe I can take a crack at that. I think,
Yeah.
One, I'll say that applicants should not cut themselves short. I think there's a lot of conventional wisdom out there that tells you that you need to have a very specific brand to be able to even think of applying to the top colleges in the US. I'll say definitely don't do that. I think if you are coming from smaller cities or tier 2 colleges, I think you can actually use that to your advantage by showcasing how that has made you realize things in your life and how they flow into what you want to do going forward, and how they really tie in with your values. I think it's more important you focus on, and this is across applicants. I think it's more important to focus on the learnings you have had from your experiences rather than just what you did in those experiences. So I'll definitely say that it could actually be a factor that will help you stand out. So
Yeah. And, to the person who asked this, Priyanshi, I would definitely advise you to reach out to us because, the questions that you've asked us, it does require a little bit of, a personal interaction. And I would definitely say that you should reach out to us, after this call. I'm going to share the contact details and, please do, reach out to us. I think we can help you better when we speak to you and get some more background. I'm also going to talk about a question, a very interesting question, in terms of what sort of relevant questions can we ask, alums when you're interacting, when you're doing your research. What are the questions that you can really ask alums regarding the school and, their roles? Anyone wants to, this is open to all.
Sure, I'll just give one small piece of advice. I think
Yeah.
it's sorry for someone speaking.
No, Karan, please go ahead. We'll
Sorry.
yeah.
I think it's really important to research. So the schools will most probably give you the alumni you will be interviewing with, or even the AdCom member you will be interviewing with. So it's important to research what their experience and what their background has been. And it's very important to personalize the question to their experience and not ask like really generic questions, which anyone can get off the internet or of any of the forums that exist. So it's really important you personalize the question to yourself and also to the background of the alumni or the AdCom member.
Yeah. And outside of the interview context, I would also say if you're reaching out to alums for information at an early stage in your application, it would be relevant for you to have a defined starting point in terms of understanding or speaking to the alum in terms of how the school has really been transformational in their professional journey. That's a good starting point because once you understand and you research the person that you're going to be speaking to, it's a good idea to understand how that should be, one of the first questions that you ask, like how has the school really been instrumental in defining the post MBA journey that they've had? What did they go into the school expecting? How did the school work on some of the on some of their perspectives, and how has that really set them up for what they've done, post the MBA? And that's a good starting point. And like Karan said, it's a good idea to really personalize your questions and do deep research in terms of understanding that the person that you're speaking to. So that perhaps is the most important piece. Make your interaction personal and understand what it's meant to them to be a part of that particular school's journey. Another question that we've got is two questions, actually. So, Siddhi, I think the first question you've asked in terms of the panelists' scores and, the time that they took to prepare for the GMAT, we've answered that, I think, a little earlier in the discussion. So you can go back and look at the recording and, you'll get a lot of insight into that. But I think the next question that you've asked is, when is the right time to apply for the fall for the September 24 cohort? And I think the answer is, just given the kind of reflection that we've spoken about that's required, now is a good time to start thinking about applying. And, if you already have schools on your radar, you should deepen your research because it will enable you to really build a strong application over the next few months. And you can reach out to us if you'd like more personal advice. You can definitely reach out to us and, we can help you on that. Another piece that I'd like to, talk about is, if someone has questions around, they may want to kind of connect with you and ask you questions around the schools that they're thinking of, and they may be thinking of applying to the schools that you did. Is it, okay for them to reach out to you? I think post this discussion as well, all our panelists are very visible on LinkedIn, and you can definitely reach out to them if you have questions. If you're from the same industry, you have the same ambitions, it's a good idea for you to reach out to them and ask them those questions. Another question that I really want to understand, and this is again from Tanvi, is, talking about goals. Goal setting is a very important part of the process that all of you went through. So, if we can just get a few thoughts around what it means to figure out your short-term and your long-term goals, and how can they really introspect on defining their short and their long-term goals so that it's not generic. And it's really very specific to, what they want to do in an MBA context. So, I'll be glad to give some insight into that, but, any of you want to take a shot at that?
Shall I go?
Yeah. Yes, please, Maldika.
Okay. Yeah. So I believe in coming up with your short-term and long-term goal, the first and most important thing would be to be authentic and to really put forward what are your goals, because you don't necessarily have to align them or twist them so that it matches with the schools that we are applying to. So be honest with it and then come up with it, and then accordingly the stories and what exactly needs to be done into that with something that the TRP team does a phenomenal job in doing. But giving the TRP team enough you can say data to work across is very necessary. So in my case also, I had a vision that I wanted to be into impact. I wanted to at the same time do something which was beyond me, beyond a particular paycheck. So that's where I worked with my lead consultant Preeti, and we actually sat and figured out that impact consulting is something that I'm looking towards for a short term goal. Long term was definitely fixed. I knew I wanted to go into entrepreneurship in a couple of years, but before that I wanted to try different industries, and I could not pinpoint exactly what I wanted. But it was with the help of Preeti. When I told her what I felt, genuinely felt, she was the one who helped me that yes, this seems to be a correct one, and I think this is what needs to be written down, and how can we frame a story across it, which was absolutely my story, but they helped me add the correct words to it. So this I believe is very necessary in setting the goal, because goal setting is one of the primary questions that each and every MBA college will definitely ask.
Yeah. And, another very relevant question is for all of you, anyone who would like to pick this up, is about, strategizing schools to apply to in round 1 versus round 2. And, I know all of you have very different patterns of applications, but anyone who would want to pick up maybe a piece of advice of someone who's thinking, should I apply in round 1 versus round 2? Karan, I think you would be best placed to do that, because
Sure.
I think you, you split your applications into round 1 and round 2. So, any
Sure.
thoughts?
I think some schools have rolling admissions, so there's a weightage given to how early you apply. So make sure you apply as early as possible to those schools. I think Columbia is one of those schools.
Not
Or
this year, by the way.
okay, yeah,
They've
changed.
changed that. Yeah, but okay. Anything.
But apart from that, I think I applied to Stanford, which was the one school I really wanted to go to in round 2, because I knew that I had to go through the process of the entire application with a few schools, so that I'm like really polished, and like all of my mistakes I know. I'll also have some data around, okay, what worked, what didn't work. So I think definitely if you have the time, definitely spread your schools across round 1 and round 2, and keep uh, your dream schools for round 2, so that you have been through the grind once before, and you have like data to fall back on how you could change your approach. Yeah, that would be my advice.
Yeah, and I think that sums up a lot of the discussions we've had with different people on this panel at different points in time. So thank you for that, Karan. I'm going to also now, we're coming to the end of our discussion. So there's a question here that is extremely relevant, and I'd like to bring it up. For anyone else who have, I think there are a couple of very, very specific questions around individual profiles and, how could you customize, or how could you mold your MBA journey basis the kind of experience that you have? And some of the questions are from people who are from technical backgrounds, who are from smaller cities, and who have different years of work experience. I think those will be answered in a lot more detail, and we can really do those questions justice after the call. If you, you can reach out to us. You can just look at scanning the QR code, which is on your screen, because I think these are questions that we're really equipped to answer one-on-one. So, please feel free to reach out to us after this call. Now, I think the question that I'm going to perhaps look at being like one of the last questions that I asked you guys is someone who said that they're planning to apply next year. They have a year to work on themselves. Any advice that you can give in terms of what is it that they can really do to add weight to their profile and, work on themselves in this 1 year? So if, without really getting into too many specifics, is there anything that you feel that someone can do in the year before they apply to build their profile? Any advice? And I'm going to look at Nisarg and Malvika over here first. Was that Malvika or was it Sangamitra?
I think Sangamitra
No, it's
had
fine.
something.
No,
Go ahead, go ahead.
Sangamitra,
Yeah.
please go ahead. Yeah.
All right. No, I just had one point to mention, which is I think, so for me, what I did is when I sort of figured out that I wanted to go the impact investor side of things, while I'm in a consulting firm, what I did is I helped kind of start our impact investor advisory practice. So I think the takeaway is that if you're looking to move in a certain direction post MBA, try and get as much experience in that field pre MBA. And even before your application, like some people wait until the application is done and then they try to get an internship in that field. But I would really say try and showcase as much as possible that you know the industry you're talking about, so that the person reading your application is convinced of the fact that this person really understands what their post MBA goals are and are already operating in that space in some sense, right? So I think that was just one point I wanted to mention. But yeah, over to you, Nisarg, again.
Yeah, please.
More than something you should do, I have advice for something you should not do. Don't do something just for the sake of thinking that it'll look good on an application. Your whole story has to be very consistent. It can't be disjointed. Don't just think that, oh, I don't have enough NGO work, I'll do NGO work in my last year. That's not going to work. Your time is better served doing something that comes naturally, something you've always wanted to do, but for some reason or the other, you haven't taken that step, whether it's fear of doing something. Just be in a sort of, you know what, I'll try it, I'll fail, but this is something I've always wanted to do. And that's something that should do something that you would have anyways done and not just for an MBA application. Because again, that is very inauthentic. That is not going to work. So yeah, that would be my advice.
Yeah. No, I think that's very true, Nisarg, because if you're doing something only for a certificate or to just add it to your resume, you're really not necessarily being authentic to yourself. So if you have a year, I would say, figure out what's really important to you and,
Exactly.
take a few steps to do something about it, because it will really add weight to what you express as your goals or your passions. If you are in a position to say that I've done something in the direction that has given me insight, that has, developed my perspective, and that has given me an understanding or added to my vision of who I am and what I want to do for the future. So I would say that if you have a year, it's a good time to introspect. It's a good time to think about things that you'd like to do. I think with that, we've just had a lot of questions. And like I said, if I've not answered your question on this interaction, look at your screen, you can screenshot it, you can just scan the QR code and just reach out to us, because, we are very detailed, we are very personal, and, we will be able to give you more customized advice based on, the questions that you have for us. But, to our panelists, I would like to say, thank you very much. I think it's been, a great journey with each of you. I think a lot of what you have said are things that we've gained a lot of insight into how you think and your passions and just your desire to do something post MBA. It's been, inspiring for us to work with you. And I think all of you are very clear in your thought process, your goals, and your best of luck for the journey that you have ahead of you over the next few years. And thank you for taking the time to speak with us.
Hey, I just want to clarify, we're very clear in our thought process after the fact. This was not us 1 year ago. So if anyone is, just don't worry about it. You'll figure it out. But,
and thank you so much, Natasha,
thank you.
and the entire team. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Congrats
Thank
to
you.
everyone on the panel, and best of luck for those applying. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.